Hi and welcome. We're into looking at groups and organizations. Now, we spend most of our lives in groups. This includes our families, friends, schools, work groups. So it's important to understand the characteristics and the dynamics of groups ranging from small informal groups to large bureaucracies. Now, this chapter provides many examples. The text and box supplements within your text is very helpful, so take some time on that, which demonstrate the application and relevance of sociology and sociological research theory to business and modern living. By learning about bureaucracies and how they work, you can better be prepared for when you experience bureaucracies yourself, both in the present and in the future. This could either be as a customer of a bureaucracy or being an employee of a bureaucracy. Now, you may not think much about the organizations and groups that influence your life, despite the many ways that bureaucracies affect them. New information technologies are also allowing us to become members of groups and organizations in more subtle, non-physical ways. A deep understanding of organizations will aid us all in the future, in our future choices and decisions, both in school and in the workplace. So let's get beginning with social groups. Now, there are different types of social groups, and as social beings, we live in our lives in groups, and they constantly affect our behavior. Social groups are distinct from both an aggregate. Now, an aggregate is a collection of people who happen to be in the same place at the same time, but have little else in common. Any group of people that are in the same place at the same time, but they aren't there because they know each other. It could be, in an arena. That's an aggregate. And there's a category. That's another term. A category. A category is a collection of individuals who have never met one another but share a similar characteristic. Now, social groups refer to two or more people. So this is how social groups will separate or be separate from aggregates and categories. Is that social groups refer to two or more people who interact frequently, share a sense of belonging, and have a feeling of interdependence. That doesn't sound at all like an aggregate or a category. Primary groups, okay, there's two kinds. We're going to say there's primary groups. These are small personal groups in which members engage in emotionally based interactions over an extended period. A family, a peer group, for example. Now, secondary groups, well, these are larger. They're more specialized groups in which members have less personal and more formal, goal-oriented relationships over a specific period of time. This could include, like, secondary groups are like universities. They also incorporate many primary groups within them. So when you think of secondary groups, they're highly specialized. So if, for example, you talk about college or a bank or an insurance company, they have a very specific tasks, to their function. They're more formal. They'll have guiding principles and job descriptions. They're goal-oriented. Everybody has to achieve certain things for the overall benefit of the group. But it's not like a primary, which is family or friends. So regardless, all groups set boundaries to indicate who does and who does not belong. Now, the in-group are groups to which we belong and in which we identify with. They provide us with both a source of identity and a point of reference. An out-group is a group to which a person does not belong and towards which the person may feel a sense of competitiveness, even hostility. Essentially, boundaries, this is the boundaries for both in-group and out-group, are intended to create belongingness and acceptance. So if you're in an in-group and when you've been in an in-group, you know that there's those that fit and those that don't fit. And when you are in an in-group, you do feel like you belong and you have acceptance. Now, there's psychological needs within this sense of boundaries. Boundaries can promote racism, sexism, ageism, and a sense of ethnocentrism. So be aware that with groups and this in-group and out-group, or these boundaries, is that sometimes where some of our discriminatory practices come from. Well, you don't belong with us. You are them. And as soon as you start getting into an us and them, you're starting, these boundaries aren't promoting all of the right things. Now, when we consider what kind of things, how groups can influence us, there's a term that's used, it's called reference group, and it's a group that strongly influences a person's behavior and social attitudes regardless of whether that individual is an actual member. Now, reference groups can help us explain why our behavior and attitudes sometimes differ from those of our membership groups. We may accept the values and the norms of a group within which we identify rather than the one in which we belong. So reference group would be like, and this was big a few years ago, where catalogs for selling clothing and stuff only had really skinny and attractive men and women. And so that being held out as a reference group, if I need to look like that and if I don't happen to fit those physical characteristics, then my reference group of how I'm supposed to look doesn't fit with me. Or if I play basketball and I play pretty well, but my reference group are the NBA players, then perhaps my reference group, is playing above my competency and may always be, in which case I might be comparing to the wrong group of people. Now, a network, and I'm sure you're familiar with the role of a network, you maybe not by the term. This is a web of social relationships that link individuals to each other. Now, as mentioned briefly in the intro, not all of our group memberships are done physically face-to-face. Some of them are done non-physical manners. This could be like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And so this sort of sense of belonging, if you have a major personal issue in your life, you turn to your social network for support. And so an understanding of social networks and their human bridges is important for us in many levels, from epidemiologists who study the spread of diseases, to individuals looking for employment, to government agencies trying to control terrorist activities, to social scientists studying the impact of gender and ethnicity on social interactions. There's all sorts of reasons to be looking at those kinds of issues. So whether a group's boundaries are formal, which are clearly defined criteria for membership, maybe you have to see if you fit within that, and you read the, am I fitting? You sign on perhaps. So whether or not you fit, whether it's formal, clearly defined criteria for membership, or they're informal. As with friendships, you don't fill out an application form for friendship. It's basically informal. The size of a group is one of the most important features. And you'll see on the image I have behind there, that dyads and triads and different size groups start to increase the possible connections that exist within groups. Now, this is a study you may have heard of indirectly. Stanley Milgram study found that it took an average of 5 contacts to get a letter to the intended recipient. Now, these 5 other people didn't know each other and didn't know in advance about each other. A letter would have been given to one person who was said that you need to give this to somebody who can get it closer to the end who we needed to get it to. The research was popularized in a movie called 6 Degrees of Separation, and the popular trivial game 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. And the whole point was how connected we are within the world in which we live, that it took 5 contacts for somebody to initiate the delivery of a letter and that intended recipient receiving it. That's pretty impressive. So some characteristics and dynamics. So what purpose do groups serve? Well, according to functionalists, people form groups to meet their instrumental, that's their task-oriented goals, and their expressive or their emotional needs. Groups help members do jobs that are impossible or very difficult to do alone. Now, conflict theorists, they believe that groups involve a series of power relationships whereby the needs of individual members may not be equally served. Now, people working together toward a common goal they could not achieve alone, the groups projects, the inequity can result in poverty and unemployment. Symbolic interactionalists focus on how group size influence interactions among its members. Support and friendship is usually very big about that. Now, what's also important about group size is it can start to introduce when people are more motivated to work to achieve goals because we are in a group, and how the group size can affect that it starts to produce loafing. People who will not do so much in a group, hoping the group will carry them along. The postmodernists look at the relationships that are increasingly becoming much more superficial in groups. The groups are becoming more online, and that's not all real. The postmodernists are about that. So, small groups. And let's look at group size here. Now, small groups, a collectivity small enough for all members to be acquainted with one another and to interact simultaneously. Now, the smallest group is a dyad, a group consisting of 2 people. A triad is a group composed of 3 members. Now, the size of the group is important. Interactions are more personal and intense in smaller groups. For example, a dyad, a group of 2, the active participation of both members is crucial for the group's survival. Dyads provide an intense bond and a sense of unity not found in larger groups. And add a third person, the dyad becomes a triad, and coercion as well as coalitions begin to appear. That is to say, as soon as there is a third person, sometimes there's the attempt for 2 to coerce the third to do as the 2 want, or to create coalitions. We'll work together against this person. Group size has an impact. As group size increases beyond 3, members tend to specialize in different tasks, and communication patterns change. So that's an important element. Now, what we can also look at a group, and this is where a lot of research has been done, and you might have seen some of this, is the role of the group in changing people's behavior. Group conformity is one that comes to mind, and Solomon Asch and Stanley Milgram's work would demonstrate in order to maintain ties with the group, members may go to great lengths to conform to group norms, lengths that can include harassment of other individuals or outgroups, and groupthink, the process by which a group arrives at a decision that members privately believe is unwise. Group conformity is way more powerful than many of us assume. The Solomon Asch's experiment has been done since he began doing it, and has been repeated hundreds and hundreds of times, and the results are the same. As much as people will stand and watch other people saying, geez, I wouldn't do that. I'd stand up for what I knew was wrong. Even if everybody else said that they were right and I was wrong, I would stand up and say, no, I'm right and they're wrong. But in reality, when we're given that situation and we are a participant and we don't know that it's an experiment, more times than you might imagine, we will conform to even though we know we're right and they're wrong, we will conform to their wrongness. And that's a powerful element about human. Now, if we add what conformity is, this is the process of maintaining or changing behavior to comply with the norms established by society, a subculture, or other group. The theory is that we tend to be significantly influenced by others in our group to the extent that we may even deny our own senses, our own loyalties, and our own commitment to the truth. And again, I've read a lot of the research, and people would adamantly support the notion they would not cave in. If they sensed it themselves or knew this to be true, they would not cave in, and yet they do when in this situation. We can't. The only people who say they wouldn't conform are those who have not been in a situation where we can test their willingness to stand alone or actually form and conform. The topic of conformity opens the dialogue where where they are competing emphasis, the connection of conformity and personal awareness of one's own values and beliefs. We encounter many different choice points in our lives, the good and the bad. Being true to one's values and beliefs or conform to those of others. In spite of your better judgment, the more connected you are, and to who you are, especially the good in us, the better able you are to make your own decisions and be proud and in the end can defend. But being aware and connected to your values and beliefs enables us to stand alone. One of the biggest benefits to standing alone is having a confederate, an ally, somebody who will stand with you. But if we are alone, you might be surprised how many of us would conform. Now there is one of these. I can't remember where I came across the phrase, where I think it was to do with a martial artist who was teaching, and he said to his students, "There is a fight between good and evil in every person." And one of the students says, "Who wins?" And the sensei says, "The one you feed the most." Things like integrity, trust, respect, acceptance, love, loyalty, if those are the things you feed, then those are the things you can defend. And so when we think, so that whole notion of, the experiments were outstanding. So let's review this experiment. The Ausch experiments, they found that participants were willing to contradict their best judgment if the rest of the group disagreed with them. What I'll probably do in this week, for this week's, you'll find 2 videos that I'll post that are YouTube videos that are of the Ausch experiment and of the Milgram experiment. Okay? So that's what the research of Ausch found, that we will contradict our own best judgment in order to fit within the group, even if we disagree with them. The Milgram's research, it was in itself, well, Milgram's research is more surprising in a sense, because really it's not a kind of an experiment that we would actually do anymore. In Milgram's, he found that participants were willing to do something, in this case in his experiments, give electric shocks, because the authority figure told them to do it. So you'll see some of the images that I've put up. When the experimenter indicated that the teacher should give increasingly painful shocks. Now you have to be aware that there was no real shock given. It was set up to make it appear that if I'm standing in front of the shocking instrument that goes graduated from something like 10 volts all the way up to 350 XXX, 450 level, and that every time I ask the question to the person in the booth and they get it wrong, I have to increase the shock that they receive. That when that was the circumstances, 65% of them administered shocks way up on the scale to XXX 450 volts. That's enough to kill somebody. But the only reason that the research found that they did that is that the guy standing beside them was wearing a lab coat and had a clipboard and said, "It's okay, I'll take responsibility. It's my experiment, carry on." And 65% of the people did. So what can be learned from Milgram Study? The study provides evidence that obedience to authority may be more common than most of us would like to believe. And again, like I said, I'll post those 2 videos in I think, what are we in, week 9. So I'll do that. Groupthink was referenced earlier. This is the process by which members of a cohesive group arrive at a decision that many individual members privately believe is unwise. I don't know if you remember, but the tragic 2010 explosion of the Deepwater Horizon oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico resulted in 11 deaths and a massive damage to the Gulf Coast. This was an example of groupthink. The Challenger space shuttle that killed the teacher, Linda McCulphy, I believe her name was, everybody was killed. I'm sorry, I shouldn't minimize that. But the reasons for that crash, that explosion in midair, the groupthink element was that people thought in that area of discussion felt that there was reasons that that launch shouldn't have gone off. But the groupthink, everybody agreed, in spite of there being people who didn't think it should have gone, and they agreed, and it did explode. Let's move into formal organizations. Now, formal organizations are highly structured secondary groups. Remember, it's not a family. Many secondary groups say, hey, we're just like a family. Well, we're not just like a family. So they're highly structured secondary groups formed to achieve specific goals in a very efficient manner. For Max Weber, it was the most perfect expression is the bureaucracy of what a formal organization. He felt bureaucracy, a formal organization characterized by hierarchy of authority, a clear division of labor, that just meant different people do different things, explicit rules and regulations, guiding principles, job descriptions, qualified-based employment, hire the best for the job based on their education, their background and experience, and impersonality, or that personnel, that sort of, it's just business, it's not personal. That's the impersonality. We're not best friends. I'm your boss, or I'm the business, you're the customer, so if it doesn't seem fair, well, it's not personal. Unfortunately for Weber, bureaucracies are more than an organization. They are people, and people fuel informal structures, activities that bypass and ignore the formal channels. You might hear the term the grapevine. So when we think in terms of what else could go, what are some of the problems or what are some of the characteristics, we can look a little more closely. So let's look at these more carefully. The division of labor. Each member has a specific status with certain assigned tasks to fulfill. It requires the employment of specialized experts who are responsible for the effective performance of their duties. So in colleges, we have administration, we have support people, and we have faculty. Each has their own specialties and their own specializations that contribute to the overall function and well-being. Then there's the hierarchy of authority, a chain of command that is based on each lower office being under the control of a supervision of a higher one. Rules and regulations. Standardized rules and regulations establish authority within the organization and usually are provided to members in a written format. This could include job descriptions, code of conduct, policies, and principles. The qualification-based employment, hiring of staff members and professional employees are based on specific qualifications. Individual performance is evaluated against specific standards, and the promotions are based on merit as spelled out in a personnel policy. And then the impersonality, this is the interaction that is based on status and standardized criteria rather than personal feelings or subjective factors. It's just business. So let's look on further with this informal structure of bureaucracies. Organizations are made of formal structures, but also they're made up of people. So each bureaucracy has its own informal structure, composed of those aspects of participants' day-to-day activities and interactions that ignore, bypass, or do not correspond with the official rules and procedures of a bureaucracy. It's known as the internal or the informal structure. Also, it's the culture. So every organization has a culture based on policies, procedures, the kind of work they do, the hierarchy. But this informal structure doesn't always follow the rules. The Hawthorne studies first made social scientists aware of the effect of the informal network of workers' productivity. The study of the electric company found that workers created their own rules in spite of the management's direction. They helped others, played cards, and swapped jobs. So the negative of this is that people can become lazy and do what they want at work. They can have a negative impact on employees who are excluded from them. The positive, though, is that they encourage cooperation among people to better meet the company's goals and the human relations approach. So we can look at some of these positives of hierarchies of bureaucracies. What are some of the shortcomings? One, inefficiencies and rigidity. Self-protective behavior of upper level and information blockage leading to the manipulation of information by upper levels. Sometimes people who need the information don't have it because they're being kept sort of, this is mine, and I don't want to give it up because my level of importance might be diminished if somehow I'm not the owner of all this information. So it can result in workers and management working at cross purposes. 2, goal displacement, the process that occurs in organizations when the rules become the end or an end to themselves rather than the means to an end. And organizational survival becomes more important than the achievement of goals. The bureaucratic personality, that's 3. It's a psychological construct that describes those workers who are more concerned with following correct procedure than they are with doing the job correctly. And some of these you may have had experience with. Resistance to change. Well, this resistance can make it very difficult for organizations to adapt to new circumstances. It's partly due to the distance between management and workers, resulting in this limited communication between them. Many companies fail because they have this inability to recognize change is required. So let's look now at the perpetuation of gender, race, and class inequities within organizations. Middle and upper class employees are more likely to have careers characterized by higher wages, job security, and opportunities for advancement. Poor and working class employees, who are more likely to be women and members of racial minorities, are more likely to work in occupations characterized by lower wages, lack of job security, and few opportunities for promotion. Now, there's a work by an updated work of Weber's work. George Ritzer looked at what he called the McDonaldization. What he calls it McDonaldization, and it's updated work of Weber's work. And it looks at what he calls McDonaldization, the process by which the principles of the fast food industry, or restaurant, come into play. Efficiency, predictability, control, for example, have been transferred as performance model to other sectors of society. Then there's efficiency. So we're going to start with efficiency. Efficiency is about treating things a bit like on an assembly line. That everything's done in a particular manner. Calculability is the emphasis on speed and quantity rather than quality. So they want to be able to be both efficient in this assembly line kind of an approach and do things quickly and a lot, not necessarily good. Predictability, standard menus and a standard scripted encounters. So one of the things that bureaucracies often do, and maybe you've had this experience, I know I have, that there's when someone calls to promote something and you ask a question, you've interrupted their reading of an actual script. Different organizations and different parts of organizations want workers to say the same thing in the same way to all people. It's like going to McDonald's and you order something and then you get you want fries with that? That's part of the scripted encounter. Control. Individual workers have little to no say in the operation of the business. And that becomes a shortcoming ultimately. And then irrationality of rationalities. The dehumanizing for both the consumer and the work. That can look like, it's not personal, it's business. Well, it felt personal to me. Rationality is the process by which traditional methods of social organization, characterized by informality and spontaneity, are gradually replaced with formal rules and procedures. Bureaucracy. And so that translates into something that doesn't seem quite as personal. And yet when you watch commercials of major organizations, they try to reach out like we're in your own home. Maple Leaf Foods makes it appear like they make their food, cold meats just like they did 80 years ago, when clearly they do not. And so that's this shortcoming is that it's gotten so out of control for many organizations. So, what about the future? Well, networks have an advantage over other organization forms because they are agile and can quickly adapt to new circumstances. Now, while we may never be certain about the future, broad social trends such as globalization, technological innovations, and the prevalence of the service economy will likely continue. Some examples: production of open source software such as Linux operating system and Firefox internet browser. These will continue, this style of group and network. These products are created by a network of people who work together with no expectation of profit. And we may see more of that example. A special case would be the Al-Qaeda and ISIS terrorists, where in some cases their illicit drug get the cocaine from fields of Colombia and Afghanistan into the streets and cities. Their flexibility, however, comes at an expense, as well as of well-specified lines of communication and means of coordination, both of which can be addressed by modern communication technologies. While network structures can help corporations become more profitable, the impact upon workers may not be so positive. It is likely that the future work lives of today's students, you and your cohort, will be affected in many ways, some more positive and some others negative. But the shift to networked organizations is probably more likely. This makes it likely that networks will be dominant organizations of the future, because they are so agile, can move and adapt, and adaptive to than other forms of networks, and are available to adjust quickly to new circumstances. Now, the term network enterprise, these are businesses which may be companies or parts of companies, and they join together for specific projects that come to focus on their that this network can take advantage of. It's one of the main elements is flexibility. It can select and change network partners based on cost, efficiency, and technological innovation. Some examples of network enterprise would be Ford, Toyota, Dell Computer, and there are many, many more. Some of the keys to success: the global internet, in addition to technology, cultural, and organizational means, are necessary. This is like the entrepreneurial culture and the democratic government and presence of well-educated workforce. Some of the problems that exist for network enterprises: there's a loss of power of the union, offshoring of jobs, and the potential for alienation. This sort of sums up our quick overview of groups and organization. I hope it's been helpful for you. Look forward to seeing you next week. Bye now.